Hello, in this session we are going to discuss about the Imports and Exports Control Act 1950. The act was passed in 1950 and erstwhile Pakistan. At that time Bangladesh was named as East Pakistan, and the act was passed in 1950. And and there has been no updation and no change in this act. That's why still in for Bangladesh we are following the same act, and you will see that though we are ruled by the Government's Republic of Bangladesh, the People's Republic of Bangladesh, but we still have on the cover page of the act the mention of Government of Pakistan. So this is a stark contrast, but anyway the act is valid in Bangladesh. In this act we have 9 sections. We have sections. The first section with the title, the coverage. Here extent means coverage, and then the valid period, that means when the act starts to be valid, which we call as commencement, and then the duration, that how long the act will remain valid. And in the second section we have the definitions to be explained in this act, and then we have sections to, in the third section we have explanation about who has the power to prohibit or restrict imports and exports. In the fourth section we have explanation about the existing orders, ordinance and rules, and how long they will continue or how they will continue. And about in section 5 we have mention about the penalty or punishments for offenses or violations of this act. And in number 6 we have the procedures mentioned about how to notify the violations or offenses. So here notification means cognizance. So the cognizance of offenses or violations. And in 7 we have the exceptions, right, which thing will not fall under this act. And in 8 we have the extraordinary power to make rules be along with this act or beyond this act. And in section 9 we have a special announcement about cancellation of previous acts and ordinances. So starting with the section 1 about the short title, extent, commencement and duration, here we have some sections. Here this act in this section has been made it clear that where this act will be applied and where it will be exempted. That means in which areas of Pakistan this act will not apply, or it will remain as an exception. Why? Because actually these areas at that time in 1950s they were either princely state, that means they had their own king in these areas. So since it is a king run or king ruled area, the rules and regulations of the Government of Pakistan was not applicable at that time. And otherwise all other provinces including East Pakistan and now Bangladesh was also covered in this act, except some few areas like Chittagong Hill Tracts, and you will also find out one area which is called Bhawalpur at that time, and right now it is some areas of Tangail that was also exempted from this act. So that's about the act. And about the commencement of this act was in force immediately. So right after it was passed in the parliament, it was valid, and it will remain valid in force for a period of 50 years. So if you calculate the time from 1950, it seems to be 1965 it is valid until but since there has not been any other act passed after 1965, so this act remains to be valid till now, both in Pakistan and also in Bangladesh. In section 2 we have the definitions for this act. We have 3 terms which are defined under this act. One term is the chief controller, the other term is the customs collector, and the third term is import and export. To me, Import and export definition as defined in this act is quite interesting. It's very simple and easy but very inclusive. It includes almost all aspects of import and export, because it just mentions that import export. By import export, this act means bringing into or taking out of the provinces by sea, land and air. So now so anything that goes out or comes in our country by sea, land or air falls under import and export. In this act, in the third section, we have we have mentioned about who has the power to prohibit and restrict imports and exports. So here the power is given to the government. Here it is mentioned the central government, because in Pakistan period there were 5 provinces including Bangladesh. So each province had their own provincial government, and centrally they had one government which is called central government. But right now in Bangladesh we have just only mention of government, because we don't have any such province. So we can take the central government as a government. So government has all the power to prohibit or restrict imports and exports. And governments, the summary of this section is that governments also requires the private exporters and importers to apply for licenses to the government for importing and exporting. Just as in the sideline, I want to share with you that right now, if you follow our import policy, we do not have requirements for any such licenses anymore. So now the people can simply register as an exporter or importer, and if they fulfill the other conditions, they can start importing and exporting. But for that, they need to also follow the conditions. If not, like if there is any mention of prohibited items or conditional items, the respective importer and exporter need to take permission, or they cannot import or export that conditional items or prohibited items. And when the government they can actually they can change any items list, and they can impose on a new item by prohibiting that item to import or export any longer. And in the fourth section we have explanation about the existing orders. Right before the Import Export Control Act, which was passed in 1950, we had another act in 1947, and that act was that act will remain valid if sections and subsections of that act will remain valid if they are not inconsistent with the Act of 1950. So if there is a provision in 1947 which is not inconsistent with the provision of 1950, that will remain valid. And about the penalty of the violations of this act by act we mean Act of 1950, Export Import Control Act. It says that if anybody does any violation of this act, then there are 3 kinds of punishment. First punishment is about 1 year imprisonment, and it can be also added with fine, or it can be both. So it can be 1 year imprisonment or fine or both. And how these offenses or violations will be notified? It says that no court shall take cognizance of any offense punishable under Section 5. Section 5 means the previous section, penalty for offenses, unless and until it is notified in writing. So the customs collector or chief controller's office, if somebody wants to complain, they need to complain, or they need to notify the violation of that of this act in writing to the court. And chief controller or the collector's office can do that. The chief controller or the collector can do that, or any officer under who is subordinate of the chief controller and collector can also do that on behalf of the collector or chief controller. And no court inferior to a magistrate of the first class. It means actually the court that you see in the local office, or somebody it cannot be the violation of import and export. It cannot be tried in a lower court than first class magistrate court. So it cannot be tried in a union council parishad. It cannot be tried in a village panchayat. It has to be a first class magistrate court. And savings are like, I mean, the exceptions is that this law or act in 1950, which was passed, it cannot be challenged in any court, and the officers who are implementing this act cannot be also sued. They cannot be tried in any court for their execution of this act. So if they are trying to enforce this act, any government officer, he cannot be tried, or he cannot be blamed or alleged for his government responsibilities in any court. And in number 8 section, the government is given the power to make any additional rules for carrying out the purpose of this act. And finally, we see that there is a mention that after this act 1950, the Act of 1947 and Ordinance of 1950 is repealed, or you can say it has been cancelled. One thing to mention you in the end, because here you see that Ordinance of 1950, and we know that our Import Export Control Act is also of 1950. There is a interesting relationship between ordinance and act. When you have a government, and the government is also working with a parliament where the lawmakers, they pass new laws or they enact new laws. So when the government need an act with emergency, because it is very necessary for them, or it has been already prepared, the act the law, I mean, passing a law is the sole responsibility of the parliament, but there is no parliamentary session right at that moment. At that time, government can proclaim the law as an ordinance, but as soon as the parliamentary session starts, then if the government raise the law in the parliament and parliament passes that ordinance, then that ordinance becomes a law. So what happened initially, that in 1950, when the act was initiated, at that time there was no session in the parliament, so they first called it as an ordinance, but when the parliament passed the law, then it became the Import and Export Control Act 1950. So that's why the previous order, which was in ordinance, it was also cancelled, because now the law is inactive. So that's all about Import and Export Control Act, and thank you all.